My wife and I have been married for 4 years, and we've been together for a solid 10 years. We both met through work, and as they say, love happened. We've been on cloud 9 ever since. And to be honest, we've had very few disagreements over the years. Maybe 5 or 6 tops. We're both fitness enthusiasts, so we work out together a lot, and that's only made us stronger. It's something we're both passionate about, and it's brought us even closer together. 3 years had passed. Our daughter had been born, and we were on cloud 9. We'd even bought our own place. My wife took a year off work to be with our little bundle of joy, and she adored being a mother. She then brought up the idea of having another child, which was a shocker since she was initially against the idea. But after seeing how happy she was with our first child, I couldn't say no to her. We then decided that she would go back to work part-time so she could be more present at home with our daughter. It was a plan that made her happy, and I was supportive of it. My wife was getting restless at her job. She felt unfulfilled and knew she had more potential to offer than her current position. So she took a leap of faith and applied for a senior role at a new company. I supported her decision and urged her to go for it. Though on paper she didn't meet all the requirements, I knew her intelligence and skills would shine through if she could just get an interview. Fast forward to a year ago, my wife got the interview, and she aced it. They offered her the job on the spot, and it was a major promotion. It came with a significant pay increase and a lot more responsibilities. She was ecstatic, and so was I. My wife landed an interview for a senior position at a new company, and she nailed it. Her package doubled from her previous job, but she had to work 5 days a week instead of alternating between 4 and 3 days. There was just one catch. One of those days would be on a Saturday. Our schedules were turned upside down. We used to have 3 to 4 days off together, but now we only had 1. I work 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, so I'm the primary caregiver for our daughter. When we discussed it, we both agreed that we could handle it because of the substantial salary increase. For the first 3 months of my wife's new job, she was assigned to manage 2 roles as a team member had decided to leave. Her workload skyrocketed, and she often worked overtime, even when she got home. I tried to be supportive, but I could sense she was overwhelmed. Meanwhile, I was going through an emotionally draining period at my own job, and I would come home hoping to vent to her. However, it seemed like she had other things on her mind and would brush off my concerns. It hurt me deeply, and I began to withdraw from any further discussions about my feelings, choosing to keep them to myself instead. I know, not the wisest decision. In February, my wife confronted me about not helping around the house as much as she would like. I knew she had a point, and I didn't want her to feel like she was carrying the whole load. During that conversation, I asked her if she still loved me, and she assured me that she did. At the time, I thought it was just a minor issue blown out of proportion because of her stress at work. For a few weeks, I did my best to help out with cooking and other household chores, but soon enough, I found myself slipping back into old habits. I still took care of our daughter and kept the house clean, but I stopped cooking again. I didn't think it was a big deal, but looking back, I realized that it was just another sign of the growing distance between us. I got myself a brand new computer and started playing video games at night to escape from reality. My wife would ask me to come to bed, but I would refuse, telling her that I just didn't feel like it and preferred to stay up. This went on for a few months before I stopped. Looking back now, I realized that it was a significant sign of disconnection between us. Was early September when I first noticed my wife was acting differently. Whenever I brought up future plans or trips, she would tell me not to book anything because she didn't feel like going. It struck me as odd, but I didn't pay too much attention to it at first. As the days went on, I noticed that the closeness between us was dwindling. She always had an excuse not to be close with me, and when we did have contact, it felt forced and uncomfortable. I knew deep down that something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Then came the week before D-Day, and everything became crystal clear. As I walked into the kitchen, something felt off. My wife was acting strange, and I could sense it. I asked her what was wrong, but she just kept saying nothing. I didn't buy it, so I kept pushing. Finally, she looked me straight in the eye and said those dreaded words. "I'm not happy anymore. I don't love you." My heart sank to the pit of my stomach. My mind was racing with questions. What did I do wrong? How did I not see this coming? We got in the car and just drove around aimlessly. I couldn't stop crying. I was in utter shock. It felt like my entire world had crumbled in a matter of seconds. How could everything have felt so perfect only to fall apart just days before D-Day? It was a feeling of complete and utter betrayal. In the car, my wife and I had a lengthy talk, away from our daughter. I could feel the tension as soon as we sat down. She seemed distant and unemotional, but I could tell something was bothering her. She finally spoke up and said that she feels like we've grown apart and that we're more like roommates than a married couple. My heart sank as she spoke those words. She also mentioned that she doesn't think I'm emotionally intelligent enough and that my video game habit is the main reason for our disconnect. I listened to everything she said and tried to see things from her perspective. As much as it hurt to hear, I could see where she was coming from. I pleaded with her to see a therapist to work on our issues, and after some reluctance, she agreed. She mentioned that she wanted to try to make things work for the sake of our daughter. It wasn't the most ideal situation, but at least it was a start. I leaned back on my chair and stared blankly at the ceiling. It was like I was looking for answers from the cosmos, searching for a glimpse of hope, of a way to get through this mess. My mind was racing, replaying the moment when my wife dropped the bombshell. "I don't love you anymore." Those words cut through me like a knife, tearing my heart into shreds. I love my wife and my daughter more than anything in this world. As I reflected on my life, I realized that the person I had become was not the one I wanted to be. With a heavy heart, I began my journey of self-reflection and growth as a man. For the next 6 weeks, I went all out to step up my game. I cooked every day, keeping the house spick and span. I knew that social media was just a distraction, so I completely stopped scrolling through other people's lives and picked up a book a day. From mindfulness to gratitude, love, marriage, and everything in between, I read them all. I realized that a successful marriage requires constant effort, and being present in the moment is key. It was something I had neglected for the past 4 or 5 months. As I delved deeper into my growth as a man, I realized how easy it is to get comfortable and complacent in a marriage. It's crucial to make time for date nights and quality time together. I made a conscious effort to listen to my wife more actively and to read her better than ever before. Despite her lack of reciprocation, I found myself falling deeper in love with her during this process. However, I couldn't help but notice that she never gave me any appreciation for anything I did. It was weird, and although I didn't expect it, it felt off. When I tried to bring it up, she accused me of smothering her with my actions, so I dialed it back a few notches. But then I noticed she became even more distant, so I started doing more things again to help. It felt like a vicious cycle. I sat down and poured my heart into a love letter for my wife, detailing all the reasons why I fell in love with her and reminiscing on our past memories. I left it on the kitchen counter for her to find when I was at work. Hours later, I received a text from her that simply read, "I received your letter. Thank you." I was taken aback by her response. It felt as if I had just received a generic reply from a stranger, rather than my own wife and best friend of almost a decade. It was clear to me that something was still not right between us. My wife and I started therapy sessions with a counselor, both as a couple and individually. My counselor of 30 years was amazed by how much progress I made in such a short period of time and saw how much I was maturing as a man. My wife acknowledged the changes, but didn't really pay much attention to it. In the 6-week period, I noticed my wife's behavior changed as she became extremely protective of her phone. She would take it with her wherever she went and kept it face down all the time. I was suspicious of this sudden change as it wasn't like her at all. One day, while she was showing me a video on her phone, a message from her boss popped up on WhatsApp. It read, "I'll give you a call later," and he replied with a thumbs up emoji. She quickly swiped the message away, which I found quite unusual. About 15 minutes later, I noticed that her boss's name wasn't on her recent conversations list on WhatsApp. It seemed like she had deleted it. As the days went by, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off. My wife and I would have a great time together at home for a few days, but then she would go for a run with her boss after work and come back completely distant and cold. She attributed it to just having good days and bad days, but I knew there was more to it. I couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that her boss was somehow involved in this sudden shift in her behavior. One day, as my wife was preparing to take a shower, I noticed her plugging her phone into the charger and turning it off before entering the bathroom. After her shower, she picked up her phone and claimed that it had turned off automatically, but my intuition told me that she was hiding something. So I confronted her in the kitchen about it, and she paled like a sheet. After a few seconds of silence, she admitted to turning off her phone so I wouldn't see the messages between her and her best friend. Although I knew she was close to this friend, her facial expressions seemed off to me. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something bigger, so I asked her point blank if she was having an affair. She adamantly denied it, but my gut told me otherwise. 2 days before D-Day, my wife invited me to a black tie work dinner, which included some really high-profile people. She told me she wanted me to see her work and to see what it's all about. I have been asking for an invite to one of these events for a long time, and finally got one. I was thrilled. However, something about the way she told me not to be physical at the event seemed off to me. It wasn't just about being professional, there was a hint of something else. Nonetheless, I decided not to dwell on it too much and just enjoy the night. The day before D-Day, my wife and I dressed up in our black tie best and attended the fancy dinner. As we walked in, I was introduced to her colleagues and seated at a table with them. I couldn't help but notice that her boss, who she goes for runs with and talks about occasionally at home, was seated at another table. I found it odd that she didn't introduce me to him. As the presentations went on, I couldn't help but notice my wife constantly looking over her shoulder, trying to make eye contact with her boss. It was like they were playing a game of cat and mouse. It reminded me of the early days of our relationship when we couldn't get enough of each other. But this time, it was different. Her boss was the one on the other end, and it didn't sit right with me. I looked at him out of the corner of my eye and saw him doing the same thing. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away. It was like a red flag waving in front of me, and I couldn't ignore it. As we sat at the dinner table, my wife would glance at me and ask if everything was okay with my meal. It felt like a guilty plea, as if she was hiding something. I didn't want to spoil the evening in front of her colleagues, so I played along. As we were heading home, I confronted her about her behavior towards her boss. She didn't deny anything, which only confirmed my suspicion. She tried to dismiss my accusations, but I knew deep down that something wasn't right. When I brought up the possibility of her having an emotional affair with him, she tried to play dumb, claiming she didn't know what that was. I knew she was smarter than that. We spent the rest of the night talking about it. On D-Day, my wife went to work and messaged me when she was about to finish, saying that she was going to have a few drinks with her colleagues, something that had become out of character for her in the last 6 months. My daughter was starting to notice that her mommy wasn't coming home or was always at work, and she wasn't even 3 yet. My wife told me she would only have a drink or two and then come home quickly, and I reluctantly agreed. My wife came home 4 hours later than expected and told me that she had a great time. She hit the showers and I asked her who she went out with. She mentioned 3 or 4 colleagues and her boss. It was weird to me that she would hang out with him in a group setting after I had just expressed my suspicion. While she was in the shower, I couldn't resist checking her phone. I saw that there were no messages between her and her boss, but there was an unsent message to him that said, "I love you too. I just know you're not in a great spot." As I read the message on my wife's phone, my heart sank. It was a message she had written to her boss, confessing her love for him. My whole world shattered in that moment. All the efforts I had put in for the last 6 weeks to win her love back were for nothing. She had been leading me on, while secretly falling in love with someone else. It was all so confusing, as she had previously told me that if I made the changes she wanted back in February, she would be more in love with me now. But it seemed like everything I did was falling on deaf ears. I confronted my wife about the message, and her expression was blank. She quickly asked, "Why are you going through my phone?" I was taken aback by her lack of remorse. I started pacing back and forth, firing questions at her left and right. She finally admitted that the emotional affair had been going on for 3 months. She also revealed that she was aware of the consequences if the relationship became public, which would lead to her being fired from her job due to the conflict of interest. But despite the risk, she continued the affair anyway. I told her to get out of the house that night, and she left for her friend's place. As she walked out of the door, I was still trying to wrap my head around everything that had just happened. How could she betray me like this? How could she do this to anyone, especially after 9 wonderful years without any issues? I had been taking care of our daughter while she focused on her career, and she just threw it all away. I was struggling to make sense of it all. My emotions were all over the place. Despite the betrayal, I couldn't deny that I still loved her deeply. The woman I married wasn't the same person I saw in the last few months. She wasn't the type to deceive or go out drinking with colleagues after work. Her vulnerabilities were preyed upon by her boss, who filled the emotional void my wife was feeling. He said all the right things and made her feel wanted, something that she wasn't getting from me at the time. In the following days, my heart was shattered, and I was filled with pain and anguish. Despite everything, I knew deep down that I still loved her, and that I wanted to make it work. We had spent over a decade building a life together, and I couldn't let it all go to waste. However, I couldn't help but think that the woman standing in front of me wasn't the same one I fell in love with all those years ago. I took off my wedding band, hoping she would notice. When she did, she asked me why I had done it. I told her the truth, that she had hurt me, and the ring didn't seem to have any meaning anymore. Even though my wife was still wearing her rings, I could see the guilt weighing heavily on her. The next day, she took them off and put them in her bedside drawer. We talked for hours, and my wife admitted how much she despised herself for what she had done. She felt disgusted that she could tell someone, whom she only had an emotional connection with, that she loved them. I reassured her that everything he told her was mere infatuation and not love. He simply told her what she wanted to hear when she was feeling emotionally distant at home. She kept asking if I understood how it had gotten to this point, and I became increasingly irate. I acknowledged that it could have been a perfect storm of several factors, but I made it clear that I would never justify her actions. My wife and I were barely getting any sleep. I was at home taking care of our daughter while she stayed on a friend's couch. 4 days after D-Day, my wife finally returned home, looking like a shadow of her former self. She was utterly exhausted, and it showed in the bags under her eyes and the way she slumped down onto the couch. I couldn't bear to see her like this, so I suggested that she sleep in our bed that night while I took the couch. She agreed, and before she drifted off, she kept apologizing for what she had done. I knew that it was going to take more than just words to fix our relationship, but I also knew that people make mistakes. I told her that I could never justify what she had done, and my trust in her had been shattered. But I was willing to work on things if she was. My wife then told me that she had cut off all communication with her boss and would only interact with him on a professional level when it was necessary. She claimed that it was only for 10, 15 minutes, and only twice a week at most. My wife confessed to me that she was still grappling with her emotions, feeling overwhelmed and confused for the past 7 weeks. I reminded her that her emotional affair with her boss outside the marriage had likely contributed to this, as she had come home to see me making huge improvements without acknowledging them. It must have been mentally draining for her. In response, my wife revealed that she was content with our life before the affair, but now she wondered if she was truly happy. My wife revealed to me that she had finally put herself first for once, and that's why she had the affair. I was taken aback by this and reminded her that she's always put others before herself. It's what she does, and it's what makes her happy. I pointed out that by putting herself first, she had lost her sense of self and morality and ended up having an affair with someone. I reminded her that she's repeating the same mistakes as her mother, who had cheated on her father 4 years earlier. At the time, my wife had been horrified by her mother's actions and had vowed never to be like her. Yet, here we are. A few days passed, and my wife surprised me by taking our daughter out for dinner before I even got home. As I walked in the door, I immediately noticed that her wedding rings were missing from the drawer where they had been sitting for days. It crossed my mind that she might have put them back on. Later that evening, she returned home, and I saw that her rings were indeed back on her finger. When we were alone, I mentioned how nice it was to see her wearing them again, and she smiled back at me saying, "But you're not wearing yours." Hmm. Her words gave me hope that she was beginning to feel the weight of her actions and the impact they had on our relationship. I headed out to the squash court and returned a few hours later feeling refreshed and ready to face the day. As soon as I walked through the door, I wrapped my arms around my wife and gazed into her eyes, saying, "I love you." To my surprise and delight, she responded, "I love you too." For once, it felt like a real, genuine exchange of affection. In the past, her responses had been guarded or dismissive, so this was a hopeful sign of progress. We sat down and she started talking. She said she had been searching for a place to stay for a while to get some space, but the options were terrible and she realized home was more comfortable. She then requested some time to be on her own for about 3 to 4 weeks to reflect on everything she had done without the pressure of everyone around her. My wife had always been someone who valued her own space, and I could tell she was feeling overwhelmed by the constant opinions of our close family, myself, and her friends. As my wife requested, we took a break from each other for a while. She said she needed time to sort out her thoughts and feelings about her boss, and I agreed it was best for her to have some space to do so. As much as it pained me, I knew that giving her the time she needed was the right thing to do. Despite still loving her deeply, I wanted her to come to her own conclusion about what was truly important in life. I hoped that during our time apart, she would come to realize that the family we have built together is worth more than a fleeting infatuation with her boss. The early part of the year was tough for us in our marriage, but it helped me grow and learn as a man. I realized the importance of communication, especially on a deeper level, and how it can unlock the key to everything. Being present in the moment and showing gratitude for what you have is also vital. I learned that becoming complacent in life or marriage is a recipe for disaster, and I never want to make that mistake again. The following day, my wife arranged to stay in an apartment for the next 4 weeks. We agreed to keep in touch during this time, and she would take our daughter with her on a few occasions. However, my wife would still come over for dinner a few nights a week, and we would have family time with our daughter. It was important for both of us to maintain some sense of normalcy for our daughter during this difficult time. My heart was shattered, knowing my wife would be away for the next 4 weeks, and I was uncertain what our future holds. But deep down, I knew it was a necessary step in the process. The constant discussions at home had become overwhelming, and we both needed some space to evaluate our feelings. It wasn't ideal, but I knew that being away would help her gain some clarity and perspective on the situation. The next few weeks were going to be tough, but I knew we had to go through this to save our marriage. It's a strange feeling to be fighting for my wife's love after the turmoil she's put me through these past 7, 8 weeks, but I can't help but hold on to hope. There were brief moments of connection during that time when her boss wasn't messaging her, and it was like my old wife was back and everything was normal again. It's those moments that keep me going, hoping that we can get through this and come out stronger on the other side. I found myself scrolling through this sub, looking for anyone with a similar story to mine. I wanted to know if there was something I could do to try and save my marriage, but ultimately, the decision lies with my wife. She needs to decide whether our 9 years together and everything we've built is worth fighting for. It's strange, but I don't feel as angry as I thought I would be. I think I've grown enough to realize that her actions don't define who she is as a person. But still, I can't help but wonder if there's anything I can do to repair the damage that's been done. Or do I simply have to wait and let things take their course?